What happens when the most feared mother-in-law in Port Harcourt meets her match? Madame Teresa, once the terror of every wife, is about to face a challenge that could change everything. Mama, after you finish mopping the floor, go and wash those plates in the kitchen. The command cut through the air like a knife, leaving Madame Teresa paralyzed in the parlor. Once a woman whose mere glance could silence a room, she now stood there like a housekeeper. Mop shaking in her grip, eyes lowered in defeat, sweat beading on her forehead. How did the fierce woman become a shadow of herself, obeying the commands of a daughter-in-law? The tension buzzed in the air. This was more than just chores. It was a battle for respect and dignity. She shuffled toward the kitchen, her expensive slippers dragging across the floor tiles. This was the same Madame Teresa who had driven away 2 wives, the same woman whose voice could shake a mansion, the same terror of Port Harcourt. Now, it's just a shadow of what it used to be. But how? To understand how the hunter became the hunted, we must go back. Back to when Madame Teresa's name alone could send shivers down your spine. Back to when she believed no woman on earth could ever be her match. She was wrong. In the bustling city of Port Harcourt, in a luxury mansion, there lived a woman whose very name commanded fear and respect in equal measure. Madame Teresa. She was a widow in her late 50s, but age had done nothing to dim her fire. If anything, it had sharpened her tongue and hardened her will. She was a tall, full-figured woman who wore her wealth like armor, designer ankara, gold jewelry that clinked when she walked, and a head tie so perfectly tied it looked like a crown. Her late husband had been a successful businessman, and when he died, he left her the duplex, 2 cars, and enough money to live comfortably. But comfort was never enough for Madame Teresa. What she wanted was control. Her son Solomon was her entire world. At 35, he was a senior engineer at one of the tech companies in town. Tall, handsome, soft-spoken, and too gentle for his own good. Madame Teresa had raised him alone after his father's death, and she reminded him of this sacrifice every single day. Solomon, no woman born of a woman can love you the way I do, she would say, adjusting his shirt before he left for work. That's why I must protect you from these girls who only see your money. And Solomon, ever the obedient son, would nod quietly and say, "Yes, Mama, you know best." People whispered whenever Madame Teresa passed by. People would quietly whisper, "That woman doesn't listen to anyone. She thinks her way is the only way." Madame Teresa had a daily routine that was very structured. Every morning at 6 a.m., she would wake up and check the mansion as if she were in charge of a military operation. She often pointed out mistakes, like how the gateman swept the driveway. After that, she would relax in her favorite chair in the living room and watch her son have breakfast. Madame Teresa was in control of everything in the house, from the TV remote to the kitchen keys and every decision made in their home. Her philosophy was simple. A mother's love is the only love that never betrays. Any woman who enters this house must know that I come first. She said it so often that even the neighbors could recite it. One afternoon, as Madame Teresa sat on her veranda fanning herself, Auntie Blessing walked past and paused. "Madame Teresa, good afternoon." "Afternoon," Madame Teresa replied without looking up. Auntie Blessing paused for a moment and then said cautiously, "Madame Teresa, the way you treat people, one day, life will teach you a lesson you won't forget." Madame Teresa looked up sharply, her eyes filled with anger. "Teach me?" she exclaimed with a sharp laugh. "Me? Madame Teresa? Who in the world do you think could teach me? Please, remove yourself from my presence." Auntie Blessing shook her head and walked away, muttering under her breath. But that evening, as the sun set over the mansion, Solomon came home with news. "Mama," he said nervously, standing in the doorway. "There's someone I want you to meet. Her name is Zainab. I want to marry her." Madame Teresa's hand fan stopped mid-air. The room suddenly felt colder. Zainab arrived on a Saturday morning, carrying a small suitcase and a smile that could melt stone. She was beautiful and a pharmacist at one of the hospitals in town, educated and well-mannered. The kind of woman any mother would be proud to call her daughter-in-law. Any mother except Madame Teresa. From the moment Zainab stepped through the gate, Madame Teresa's eyes followed her like a hawk watching a mouse. She didn't smile. She didn't stand to greet her. She simply sat in her chair, arms folded, and watched. "Good morning, Madame Teresa," Zainab said softly, kneeling with both knees on the floor, her head bowed respectfully. Madame Teresa let the silence stretch. Then, finally, she spoke. So you're the one. Zainab looked up, confused. Ma? The one who wants to take my son away. Madame Teresa's voice was cold. Stand up. Let me see you clearly. Zainab stood slowly, her smile faltering. Madame Teresa circled her like a judge inspecting evidence. She looked her up and down, then hissed. Solomon, is this the woman you want to marry? She's very beautiful. Pretty women can come with their own challenges, his mother remarked. Solomon chuckled anxiously. Mom, Zainab is a wonderful person. We'll see about that, Madame Teresa replied, looking away. Only time will reveal the truth. The first week was deceptively calm. Zainab woke early, swept the mansion, cooked breakfast, and served Madame Teresa with a smile. She washed clothes, cleaned the kitchen, and never complained. But Madame Teresa was not impressed. One morning, after Zainab had just finished mopping the entire house, Madame Teresa walked through the living room and deliberately poured a cup of coffee. Zainab, she shouted, come and see this mess. You call this cleaning? Zainab rushed in, saw the water spreading across the tiles, and quickly grabbed a rag. Sorry, Ma, I'll clean it now. Sorry, Madame Teresa snapped. Sorry, it doesn't dry my floor. What kind of home training did your mother give you? Zainab bit her lip and said nothing. The attacks became more frequent. When Zainab cooked jollof rice, Madame Teresa tasted it and spat it out dramatically. Did you pour a packet of Maggi cubes inside? You want to kill me with salt? When Zainab folded clothes, Madame Teresa scattered them. When visitors arrived, Madame Teresa would tell them, my son's wife, she proclaimed loudly to her friends. Well, she is trying, but you know how these modern girls are. They just don't cook like we used to. For them, it's all about seasoning cubes and quick fixes. Zainab stood in the corner, forcing a smile, her hands trembling. Solomon saw it all, but said the same thing every time. Zainab, please, just be patient. My mom with change. She's just protective. But Madame Teresa had no intention of changing her ways. The final blow came 3 months later. Madame Teresa called a family meeting and accused Zainab of stealing her gold earring, the one she had deliberately hidden in her own drawer. Thief! Madame Teresa screamed, pointing at Zainab in front of the mansion. She came into this house to steal from me. I knew it. I knew she was after our money. Zainab's face crumpled. Ma, I would never. Search her room, Madame Teresa commanded. Search it now. The neighbors gathered. The gateman looked away. Solomon stood frozen, torn between his mother and his wife. That night, Zainab packed her bags in silence. She left a note on the table, her wedding ring beside it. Solomon, I loved you, but I can't survive your mother. Forgive me. When Solomon woke and found the note, his world shattered. But Madame Teresa simply said coldly, good, she was never a wife material. Don't worry, my son, I will find you a proper woman. And just like that, the first wife was gone. 6 months passed like a funeral procession, slow, heavy, and filled with unspoken grief. Solomon became a shadow of himself. He went to work, came home, ate in silence, and stared at the TV without watching. His laughter disappeared, his light dimmed, and though he never said it out loud, everyone could see it. He blamed his mother. But Madame Teresa? She moved on as if nothing had happened. My son, stop sulking, she would say, waving her hand dismissively. That girl was not for you. God removed her before she destroyed your life. You should be thanking me. Solomon said nothing. He simply looked away. But Madame Teresa was already plotting. She couldn't let her son waste away. He needed a wife. The right kind of wife this time. Someone who would respect her authority and know her place. One Sunday after church, a friend talked about a lawyer from a nearby town. She was young, attractive, well-educated, and interested in finding a serious relationship. Her name is Sarah. When Sarah arrived 2 weeks later, the mansion held its breath. She stepped out of a taxi wearing a sleek pencil skirt, heels that clicked against the pavement, and sunglasses that screamed confidence. Her hair was styled, and her lips were painted a bold red. She walked straight to Madame Teresa, extended her hand, and said casually, I'm Sarah. Nice to meet you. No kneeling, no bowing, just a handshake. Madame Teresa stared at the outstretched hand as if it was a snake. So, your legs are too precious to kneel? Madame Teresa asked slowly, her voice dripping with disbelief. Sarah smiled politely. Respect is in the heart, Ma, not in the knees. The air crackled with tension. From day one, it was war. Madame Teresa locked the kitchen cupboard and kept the key tucked inside her bra. "If you want to cook," she announced, "you must ask me first." Sarah didn't argue. She simply went to the market the next day and bought her own stove, her own pots, and her own ingredients. She set up a cooking station in the corridor outside and cooked there, humming gospel songs as smoke curled into the evening air. Madame Teresa nearly exploded. "Solomon, you see what this girl is doing? She's disrespecting me in my own house." Solomon sighed. "Mama, she's just cooking. What's the problem?" Madame Teresa hissed. "Is that she has no home training." But Sarah wasn't Zainab. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She simply lived her life and refused to be controlled. So Madame Teresa changed tactics. She began to spread rumors. "That Sarah girl," she whispered to the neighbors, "she's not normal. I've been watching her. Anytime she looks at me, my body shakes. That's not ordinary." "Eh?" Auntie Blessing gasped. "You mean?" "I'm not saying she's a witch," Madame Teresa said carefully, "but something is not right. Since she entered this house, peace ran away." The rumors spread like wildfire. Soon, people began avoiding Sarah. They greeted her from a distance. They whispered when she passed. One evening, Solomon came home to find his mother lying on the floor, clutching her chest and groaning. "Mom, what happened?" he cried, rushing to her side. It's her." Madame Teresa gasped dramatically. "That girl, she's using something on me. My chest, I can't breathe." Sarah walked in from the room, saw the scene, and immediately understood. "Mama, stop lying," she said firmly. Madame Teresa's eyes flew open. "You see, she's shouting at me. In my own house, my son, this girl wants to kill me." "I'm not shouting," Sarah said, her voice rising now. "I'm telling the truth. You've been spreading lies about me, calling me a witch, turning everyone against me." "Witch?" Madame Teresa screamed, rolling on the floor now. Sarah stood there, fists clenched, tears of frustration streaming down her face. Solomon stood between them, helpless and humiliated. "Both of you, please, just stop." The next morning, while Solomon and Sarah were at work, Madame Teresa packed all of Sarah's belongings into 2 bags and threw them outside the gate. When Sarah returned from the office and saw her things scattered on the street, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply walked up to Madame Teresa. "Madame Teresa," Sarah said quietly, her voice cold as ice, "one day you will meet a woman who will treat you exactly the way you've treated us. And on that day, I want you to remember my face." Madame Teresa watched her go, then turned to the neighbors and declared loudly, "Peace has finally returned to this house." But that night, alone in her room, a strange chill crept through the air. And for the first time in years, Madame Teresa felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Fear. Solomon was now 37, unmarried, and visibly broken. He stopped going to church. He stopped attending family gatherings. He came home from work, ate alone in his room, and barely spoke to his mother. The silence between them was thick and suffocating, like smoke from a dying fire. Madame Teresa tried to ignore it at first. She told herself he would get over it, that he would thank her one day for protecting him. But deep down, in the quiet hours of the night when sleep refused to come, she felt something biting at her chest. Guilt? No. She refused to call it that. Doubt? Maybe. One evening, as she sat alone on the balcony watching the sun sink behind the rooftops, Auntie Blessing walked past and stopped. "Madame Teresa," she said softly, "your son is not happy." Madame Teresa didn't look at her. "He will be fine. Will he?" Auntie Blessing pressed gently. "2 wives have left. 2 good women. And now your son looks like a man carrying a heavy load. Madame Teresa, when will enough be enough?" Madame Teresa's jaw tightened. "You don't understand. I'm protecting him." "From what?" Auntie Blessing asked. "From love? From happiness? Or from losing control?" The words hung in the air like a curse. Madame Teresa turned around quickly, angry. "Stay out of this, Auntie Blessing. Don't get yourself into trouble with your words." Auntie Blessing sighed and shook her head, then walked away quietly, muttering a prayer as she left. That night, Madame Teresa couldn't sleep, her mind replaying Auntie Blessing's words over and over. From losing control. No, that wasn't it. She wasn't controlling. She was protecting. Wasn't she? But then she remembered Zainab's face, the way her eyes had filled with tears when she was accused of stealing. She remembered Sarah's final words, cold and sharp as a blade. "One day, you will meet a woman who will treat you exactly the way you've treated us." Madame Teresa sat up in bed, her heart pounding. "Nonsense," she whispered to herself. "It's just talk. Empty talk." but the fear lingered. The next morning, she made a decision. "I will go to the village," she announced to Solomon over breakfast. "I will find a proper wife for you myself, a girl with home training. Not these Lagos Port Harcourt girls who wear trousers and answer their husbands by name." Solomon looked up from his plate, his eyes tired. "Mom, please, I don't want another wife." "You don't know what you want," Madame Teresa snapped. "That's why I'm your mother." Before he could protest further, she was already packing her bag. 3 days later, Madame Teresa arrived in her home village. Children ran barefoot through the dusty paths, and women balanced baskets on their heads as they walked to the market. Madame Teresa felt a strange sense of peace here. This was where real women were raised. Women who knew respect. Women who understood that a mother-in-law was to be honored, not challenged. She went from house to house, asking the same question. "Do you know any good girl? Respectful, humble, and ready for marriage?" After a week of searching, someone finally mentioned a name. "There's a girl," an old woman said, pointing towards a small compound in the village. "Her name is Agatha. She just finished university. Very quiet, very respectful." Madame Teresa's heart leapt. "Take me to her," she said immediately. Agatha's parents welcomed Madame Teresa warmly, offering her a seat and a cup of cold water. Then Agatha appeared. When she saw Madame Teresa, she immediately knelt down, her head bowed. "Good afternoon, Ma," she said softly. "You are highly welcome." Madame Teresa's eyes filled with tears of joy. "This is the one," she thought. "God has finally answered my prayers." She turned to Agatha's parents. "I want this girl for my son. I will treat her like my own daughter. I promise you." The parents exchanged glances, then smiled. "If Agatha agrees, we have no problem." Agatha looked up shyly and nodded. Within 2 weeks, the introduction was done. The bride price was paid, and Agatha packed her small box and followed Madame Teresa to Port Harcourt. As the bus rumbled along the dusty road toward the city, Madame Teresa smiled to herself, feeling victorious. But in the seat beside her, Agatha stared out the window, her face calm and unreadable. And if Madame Teresa had looked closely, really closely, she might have seen something flicker in the young woman's eyes. Something cold. Something patient. Something dangerous. For the first 3 weeks, Agatha was perfect. She woke before dawn, swept the entire mansion, prepared breakfast, and served Madame Teresa in bed with a warm smile. "Madame Teresa, good morning. I made pap and bean cake for you." Madame Teresa would beam like a queen. "Ah, my daughter. You see? This is what a real wife looks like." Agatha would bow her head humbly. "Thank you, Madame Teresa. I'm just doing my duty." Solomon watched cautiously at first, but slowly he began to smile again. Agatha was gentle with him, respectful, and genuinely kind. She laughed at his jokes, massaged his shoulders after work, and called him my king. Madame Teresa bragged to everyone who would listen. "You see my new daughter-in-law? She's a jewel. She washes my clothes, calls me Queen Mother, and never talks back. I told you people, I know how to choose a wife for my son." The neighbors clapped and congratulated her. Even Auntie Blessing seemed impressed. But then, something shifted. It started small. One evening, Solomon had to work late. Madame Teresa was sitting in the living room when she called out, "Agatha, where's my dinner?" From the bedroom, Agatha's voice came back lazily. "Mama, I'm coming." 20 minutes passed. "Agatha," Madame Teresa called again, louder this time. "What kind of nonsense is this?" Agatha finally emerged, phone in hand, her face blank and cold. "Madame Teresa," she said flatly, "if you're hungry, go and warm the food yourself. You're not crippled." Madame Teresa froze, her mouth opened, but no words came out. Agatha stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You think because I smile I'm stupid? You think I'm like Zainab? Like Sarah?" Mama's heart began to pound. "Let me tell you something, Madame Teresa," Agatha continued, her eyes hard as stone. "I know exactly who you are. I've studied you, and now you're going to learn what it feels like. So go to the kitchen quietly and warm your food before I lock it." Then she smiled sweetly, turned, and walked back to the bedroom. Madame Teresa sat there trembling, her mind spinning. What just happened? From that night on, Agatha became two people. In front of Solomon, she was an angel, kneeling to greet him, cooking his favorite meals, laughing at his stories, calling him baby in a voice dripping with honey. But the moment he left for work, her mask fell. "Madame Teresa, go and mop the living room," she would command coldly. "Agatha, please." "Please what?" Agatha would snap. "You think I came here to serve you? You're the one with nothing to do all day. Move. Madame Teresa tried to resist at first. She shouted back. She threatened. But Agatha simply smiled and said, "Go ahead. Tell your son. Let's see who he believes, his sweet, respectful wife, or his bitter, troublesome mother." And Madame Teresa knew she was trapped. When Madame Teresa asked for food, Agatha would say, "Madame Teresa, I already served you this morning. Don't overeat. It's not good for old people." One evening, Solomon noticed his mother sitting in the corner, staring at nothing. "Mom, are you okay?" She forced a smile. "I'm fine, my son." But her eyes told a different story. Solomon tried to talk to Agatha. "Darling, is everything okay with you and my mom?" Agatha's face melted into concern. "Oh, baby, I've been trying so hard. But you know your mom, she's still adjusting. Sometimes she gets upset with me for small things. I just keep praying she'll accept me." She even squeezed out a tear. Solomon hugged her. "Don't worry, she'll adjust." Madame Teresa, listening, felt her heart shatter. The final humiliation came one Saturday afternoon. Solomon was in the living room watching a football game. Agatha walked in with a broom and handed it to Madame Teresa, who was sitting quietly in the corner. "Mom," Agatha said sweetly, loud enough for Solomon to hear, "after you finish sweeping, make sure you wash the plates in the kitchen. I'm tired." Solomon didn't even look up from the TV. Madame Teresa's hands trembled as she took the broom. She wanted to scream. She wanted to fight. She wanted to tell her son the truth. But she knew no one would believe her. So she stood up slowly, her body heavy with shame, and began to sweep. Agatha sat down on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, smiling. And in that moment, Madame Teresa understood. This was karma. This was the mirror Sarah had warned her about, and there was no escape. That night, Madame Teresa lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, tears streaming silently down her face. The next day, Solomon couldn't ignore it anymore. His mother had become a ghost. She barely ate. She barely spoke. The woman who once commanded every room she entered now shuffled through the house like a shadow, eyes downcast, shoulders slumped. And then there was Auntie Blessing's warning, echoing in his mind. "The way your wife treats your mother when you're not around, it's not good." So one Thursday evening, Solomon did something he had never done before. He lied. "I have a late meeting," he told Agatha that morning. "I'll be home around 10 p.m. She kissed him at the door, smiling sweetly. "Okay, baby, I'll keep your food warm." But Solomon didn't go to any meeting. He came back from work earlier than usual, slipped through the gate and stood outside the living room window. And then he heard it. Agatha's voice. Sharp, cold, poisonous. "Madame Teresa, I said, don't touch my pot. If you're hungry, go and cook your own food." Solomon's blood ran cold. His mother's voice came next, weak and pleading. "Agatha, please. I'm just hungry." "Hungry?" Agatha laughed bitterly. "You should be thanking God I even let you stay in this house. If not for me, you'd still be rotting in the village, begging for scraps." "Please, my daughter." "Don't call me your daughter," Agatha snapped. "You're nothing but a wicked old woman who destroyed 2 good marriages. Now see how it feels to be the one suffering." Solomon's hands clenched into fists. He pushed the door open. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Agatha spun around, her face frozen in shock. Then, in the blink of an eye, her expression melted into sweetness. "Baby," she gasped, rushing toward him with open arms. "You're home early, I was just—" "Stop!" Solomon's voice was ice. Agatha froze. "What were you two talking about?" he asked quietly, his eyes locked on hers. "Nothing serious, baby," Agatha said quickly, forcing a smile. "You know, your mom, she likes to exaggerate small things. Go and pack your things, you are leaving this house." The room went silent. Agatha blinked. "What?" "I said pack your things," Solomon repeated, his voice low and trembling with rage. "You're leaving this house, now. Baby, please." Agatha fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. I was frustrated. Please don't send me away." "How long?" Solomon's voice cracked. "How long have you been treating my mother like this?" I... Agatha sobbed, her hands clasped together. "Please, baby, forgive me. I love you. I swear I'll change." Solomon turned to his mother, who stood in the corner, silent and trembling. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking. "Why didn't you tell me?" Madame Teresa looked at her son, tears rolling down her cheeks, but she said nothing. "That's it," Solomon said, turning back to Agatha. "Get out. I don't care where you go. Just leave." "No," Agatha screamed, clutching his legs. "Please, don't do this." "Solomon." The voice was soft, but it cut through the chaos like a knife. Everyone turned. Madame Teresa stepped forward slowly, her eyes red but steady. "Solomon," she said again, "don't send her away." Solomon stared at his mother in disbelief. "Mom, how can you defend her after everything she did to you?" "I'm not defending her," Madame Teresa said quietly. She looked at Agatha, who was still on her knees, sobbing. "But if you throw her out now, you'll be making the same mistake I made." Solomon frowned. "What do you mean?" Madame Teresa took a deep breath. "I need to hear the truth first." She turned to Agatha, her voice firm but not unkind. "My daughter, what you did to me was wicked. You hurt me deeply, but before my son sends you away, tell me the truth. Why are you treating me like this?" Agatha's sobs grew louder. She covered her face with her hands, her whole body shaking. "Tell me," Madame Teresa pressed gently. "Why?" For a long moment, there was only the sound of Agatha crying. Then slowly she looked up. Her face was streaked with tears and mascara, her eyes red and swollen, and she whispered the words that would change everything. Because I know Zainab." The room seemed to tilt. Solomon's mouth fell open. Madame Teresa's hand flew to her chest, and Agatha, still on her knees, began to speak. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing mascara across her cheek. "When she came back to the village after you people drove her away, she was broken. She couldn't eat, she couldn't sleep, she cried every time. I watched her waste away because of you, Madame Teresa." Madame Teresa's legs gave way. She sank into the nearest sofa, her hand pressed against her mouth. Agatha's voice grew stronger, fueled by months of buried anger. "I was so angry. I wanted to do something, anything, to make you feel what she felt. So, when I heard you were looking for a village wife, I made sure I was the one you found." Solomon stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what he was hearing. You planned this?" he whispered. "From the beginning?" Agatha nodded, fresh tears spilling down her face. "I studied you, Madame Teresa," she said, looking directly at Madame Teresa. "I knew exactly what you wanted. A quiet, kneeling, obedient girl. So I became that girl. I played the role perfectly." She laughed bitterly through her tears. "And it worked. You brought me into this house with open arms. You trusted me. You bragged about me." Madame Teresa's shoulders began to shake. "But once I got you alone," Agatha continued, her voice dropping, "I showed you your own face. Every insult, every command, every humiliation. That was you, Madame Teresa. That was what you did to Zainab. To Sarah. To every woman who tried to love your son." The silence that followed was suffocating. Solomon finally found his voice. "So, you never loved me? It was all a lie?" Agatha's face crumpled. "No," she whispered. "At first, yes. It was all revenge. But somewhere along the way," she looked up at him, her eyes pleading. "I fell in love with you, Solomon. Truly. I didn't plan for that. I didn't want it. But it happened." She covered her face with her hands, sobbing. "And that's why I hate myself now. Because I became the same monster I was trying to fight. I wanted to teach Madame Teresa a lesson. But I went too far. I let bitterness turn me into her." Madame Teresa stood slowly, her legs trembling. She walked toward Agatha, each step heavy with the weight of realization. When she reached her, she knelt. Solomon gasped, "Mom!" But Madame Teresa raised her hand, silencing him. She looked into Agatha's tear-streaked face and said softly, "My daughter, you succeeded." Agatha's eyes widened. "You broke me." Madame Teresa continued, her own tears falling freely now. "You showed me my own cruelty. You held up a mirror, and I finally saw the monster I had become." She reached out and gently lifted Agatha's chin. "I just wish," Madame Teresa whispered, her voice breaking, "that it hadn't caused us all so much pain." Agatha let out a sob and collapsed into Madame Teresa's arms. The two women held each other, one broken by revenge, the other broken by pride, and wept together. Solomon stood watching, his own eyes wet, his heart torn between anger and compassion. After a long moment, he spoke. "Agatha, you hurt us both," Solomon said quietly. "You manipulated me. You tortured my mother. And I don't know if I can ever forget that." Agatha nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. "I understand. I deserve it. But," Solomon continued, his voice softening, "if Mama can forgive you, then who am I not to try?" Agatha's breath caught. Solomon extended his hand. She stared at it for a moment, then took it, and he pulled her to her feet. "I don't know what happens next," Solomon said. "But maybe we all need to start all over." Madame Teresa stood as well, wiping her eyes. "Yes," she said softly, "maybe it's time we all learned what real forgiveness looks like." The three of them stood there in the quiet living room, the weight of the past slowly beginning to lift. Outside, the night air was cool and still, and for the first time in months, the house felt like it could breathe again. The next morning felt different. The air in the house was lighter, as if a heavy cloud had finally lifted. Sunlight streamed through the windows, and for the first time in months, there was no tension hanging in the corners. Madame Teresa woke to the smell of breakfast, not the forced, resentful kind, but the kind made with genuine care. Agatha had prepared boiled yams and egg sauce, and she brought it to the table with a soft smile. "Good morning, Mama," she said quietly. Madame Teresa looked at her for a long moment, then smiled back. "Good morning, my daughter." They sat together, all three of them, and ate in silence at first. But it wasn't the cold, suffocating silence of before. It was the kind of silence that comes after a storm, when the world is still catching its breath. Solomon looked at his mother, then at his wife, and said softly, "No more secrets, no more games, just family." They both nodded, and slowly, carefully, they began to heal. In the weeks that followed, Madame Teresa did something no one expected. She sought out Zainab. It took courage, more courage than she thought she had left, but she found her at the hospital where she worked. When Zainab saw her standing at the entrance, her face went pale. "Madame Teresa," she whispered. Madame Teresa didn't speak at first. "Forgive me," she said, her voice breaking. "I was wicked to you. I destroyed your marriage. I destroyed your peace. And I am so, so sorry." Zainab's eyes filled with tears. "I forgive you, Madame Teresa," she whispered. "I forgave you a long time ago." Madame Teresa also found Sarah. The lawyer was skeptical at first, arms folded, eyebrow raised. "So you finally learned," Sarah said coldly. "Yes," Madame Teresa replied. "The hard way." Sarah studied her for a moment, then sighed. "You know, Madame Teresa, I never hated you. I just refused to be broken by you. And you were right," Madame Teresa said. "I needed someone like you to stand up to me. I just wish I had listened." Sarah's expression softened. Well, better late than never. And though the wounds were still fresh, forgiveness had begun its quiet work. Months passed. Madame Teresa became a different woman, not because she was forced to, but because she chose to. She started a women's fellowship at her church, where she spoke openly about her mistakes. "I was a terror," she would say to the other mothers and mothers-in-law. "I thought control was love. I thought fear was respect, but all I did was drive away the very people I should have cherished." The women listened, some nodding. And every Sunday, Madame Teresa would introduce Agatha to new members with pride. "This is my daughter-in-law," she would say warmly, "the one God used to save my soul." Agatha would blush and smile, and Solomon would squeeze her hand. Their home became a place of laughter again. Not perfect. No home ever is perfect. This story teaches us a timeless truth. Life is a mirror. What you give out, kindness or cruelty, will eventually come back to you, often in unexpected ways. Madame Teresa learned that using power to hurt others not only plants the seed of pain in their lives, but in ours as well, which will grow over time. However, the story also reveals that change is possible. Even the hardest heart can soften, and the deepest wounds can heal through forgiveness. The way we treat others today shapes our future. Every action is a seed, and time is the soil that allows it to grow. So I ask you, what seeds are you planting today? Are they of love, patience, and respect, or pride, control, and bitterness? Remember, one day you will reap the fruit of what you've sown. Stay humble, prayerful, and cherish the seeds you plant.